The spring morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Maple Grove Elementary School's gymnasium, casting long rectangles of light across the polished floor. Officer Jake Morrison pulled his patrol car into the visitor parking lot, the familiar weight of anticipation settling in his chest. In the back seat, Rex panted softly, his dark eyes alert and intelligent behind the metal barrier that separated the K9 compartment from the rest of the vehicle. "Ready for your favorite gig, buddy?" Jake asked, glancing in the rearview mirror at his partner of 3 years. Rex's ears perked forward, and his tail began a measured wag. The German shepherd knew this routine well. The elementary school visits were among his favorite assignments, a welcome break from the intensity of drug detection and suspect apprehension. Jake stepped out into the crisp Ohio air, the scent of fresh-cut grass from the school's athletic fields mixing with the lingering smell of breakfast from the cafeteria. Columbus was experiencing one of those perfect spring days that made people forget about the brutal winter that had finally released its grip. He walked around to Rex's compartment, opened the door, and attached the lead to his partner's collar. Rex jumped down with practiced ease, his muscles rippling beneath his tan and black coat. Inside the school, Principal Margaret Whitmore waited by the main entrance, her face brightening when she saw them approach. "Officer Morrison, Rex, the children have been talking about nothing else all week." Jake smiled, adjusting his duty belt. "Happy to be here, Principal Whitmore. 3rd time this year, right?" "4th, actually," she corrected, walking alongside them down the hallway decorated with colorful student artwork. "We added an extra session because the last one was so popular. We have the entire K5 student body in there today, plus some special guests, a few preschoolers from our early childhood program." The sounds of excited children grew louder as they approached the gymnasium. Through the small window in the double doors, Jake could see a sea of young faces, some sitting cross-legged on the floor, others bouncing with barely contained energy. Teachers and parent volunteers lined the perimeter, smartphones ready to capture the demonstration. "All right, Rex," Jake murmured, pausing before they entered. "Show time." The moment they pushed through the doors, a collective gasp rose from the children, followed by enthusiastic applause. Rex walked with professional dignity beside Jake, his training evident in every measured step. They made their way to the center of the gymnasium where a small obstacle course had been set up, tunnels, jumps, weave poles, and various props for the demonstration. Jake raised his hand for quiet and the room gradually settled. "Good morning, everyone. My name is Officer Jake Morrison and this is my partner Rex. Can everyone say hello to Rex?" "Hello, Rex," the children chorused, their voices echoing off the cinderblock walls. "Rex and I work together for the Columbus Police Department," Jake began, falling into his practiced presentation. "Rex is what we call a K9 officer, which means he's a police dog specially trained to help keep our community safe. Can anyone guess what special skills a police dog might have?" Hands shot up like rockets. Jake pointed to a boy in a Buckeyes t-shirt. "They can smell drugs," the boy announced proudly. "That's right, Rex has a nose that's about 40 times more powerful than a human's. What else?" "They can chase bad guys," a girl called out. "They can find lost people," another voice added. Jake nodded enthusiastically. "All correct. Today, Rex is going to show you some of the things he does to help people every single day." For the next 20 minutes, Jake put Rex through his paces. The German shepherd executed commands with precision: sit, stay, down, heel. He navigated the obstacle course with the grace of an athlete, sailing over jumps and weaving through poles. For the detection demonstration, Jake had hidden a training scent in one of several boxes arranged across the floor. Rex worked methodically, sniffing each box until he sat alertly beside the correct one, signaling his find. The children were mesmerized, but none more so than a small figure seated in the front row of the preschool group. 3-year-old Emma Chen sat perfectly still, her tiny hands folded in her lap, her dark eyes tracking Rex's every movement with an intensity unusual for such a young child. While the other children around her wiggled, whispered, and pointed, Emma remained motionless, as if frozen in place. Her temporary teacher, Mrs. Patterson, filling in for Emma's regular preschool instructor, kept a gentle hand on the little girl's shoulder. Emma was attending today as a special exception, brought along with her older sister Lily's second-grade class. Mrs. Patterson had been briefed about Emma's situation. The little girl hadn't spoken a single word in 6 months, not since her father's death in a terrible car accident. The school counselor thought exposing Emma to positive, exciting experiences might help, but so far, she'd remained locked in her silent world. Jake moved into the final portion of his demonstration, allowing the children to meet Rex up close. "Now, who would like to come pet Rex?" he asked. The response was immediate and overwhelming. What seemed like every hand in the gymnasium thrust skyward, accompanied by a chorus of me, pick me. Jake laughed. Okay, we'll do this in an orderly fashion. Teachers, can you help me select a few volunteers?" As teachers began organizing small groups to come forward, something unexpected happened. Emma Chen stood up. She didn't raise her hand. She didn't ask permission. She simply rose to her feet with a determination that seemed to pull her forward against her will. Mrs. Patterson noticed immediately. "Emma, sweetie, we need to wait our turn." But Emma took a step forward, then another. Her small sneakers squeaked softly against the gymnasium floor as she began walking toward Rex with the single-minded focus of someone following an invisible thread. The children nearest to her fell silent, noticing the little girl's strange procession. The silence spread like ripples on water, one section of the gymnasium quieting after another until even the teachers stopped talking. Jake, kneeling beside Rex with his first group of excited petting volunteers, felt the change in the room's atmosphere. He looked up to see the toddler approaching, her face a mask of intensity that sent an inexplicable chill down his spine. Rex, too, had gone still, his ears pricked forward, his intelligent eyes locked onto the small figure moving toward them. Emma stopped approximately 3 feet away. The distance felt deliberate, measured. Rex sat perfectly still beside Jake, but something in the dog's posture had changed. His tail had stopped wagging. His head tilted slightly to one side, as if listening to a sound only he could hear. The entire gymnasium held its breath. Emma's lips parted, and in the profound silence, her voice, unused for half a year, rang out clear and unmistakable, shattering the morning like glass. "My daddy." The 2 words hung in the air like smoke, visible to everyone yet incomprehensible. For a moment, time seemed suspended in the Maple Grove Elementary Gymnasium. Hundreds of pairs of eyes locked on the small girl standing before the police dog. Jake Morrison's training had prepared him for many scenarios: aggressive suspects, dangerous situations, unpredictable crowds. But nothing in his experience had equipped him for the sight of a 3-year-old child staring at his K-9 partner with a mixture of recognition, longing, and absolute certainty that defied all logic. "I'm sorry, what did she say?" Jake asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Emma didn't look at him. Her entire focus remained on Rex, and the German Shepherd, for his part, had gone completely still in a way Jake had never witnessed before. Rex was trained to remain calm in chaotic situations, but this was different. The dog's body language spoke of something Jake couldn't quite identify: recognition, confusion. His partner's dark eyes were fixed on the little girl with an intensity that made the hair on the back of Jake's neck stand up. Mrs. Patterson rushed forward, her face flushed with embarrassment. "Emma, honey, no." She reached for the child's hand, but Emma pulled away, taking another step toward Rex. "My daddy," Emma said again, louder this time, her small voice cracking with emotion. Her bottom lip began to tremble, and tears welled up in her dark eyes, spilling down her round cheeks. The murmurs started then. rippling through the crowd of children and adults like wind through tall grass. What's she talking about? Whose kid is that? Did she just say? Principal Whitmore materialized beside Jake, her professional smile strained. Officer Morrison, I apologize for this disruption. Emma is one of our preschoolers who's been going through a difficult time. She hasn't spoken in months, so this is actually quite. My daddy, my daddy. Emma's voice rose to a wail and she lunged forward, her small arms outstretched toward Rex. Jake's instinct was to protect his K-9 partner, to maintain control of the situation, but something stopped him. Rex hadn't moved. The dog sat like a statue, but his tail had begun to move. Not the enthusiastic wag of a dog greeting children, but something slower, more deliberate, almost hesitant. Mrs. Patterson managed to wrap her arms around Emma, pulling the sobbing child back. I'm so sorry, she said to Jake, struggling to hold the wriggling toddler. Her father passed away 6 months ago. She's been in therapy, but she hasn't said a word since the funeral. I don't know what. Emma's cries had become heartbreaking sobs, the kind of grief-stricken sounds that no child should have to make. Daddy, Daddy, please. Her small hands reached desperately toward Rex, her fingers grasping at empty air. And then something happened that Jake Morrison would replay in his mind 1,000 times in the days to come. Rex whimpered. It wasn't the whimper of a dog confused by a crying child. It wasn't the uncertain vocalization of an animal responding to distress. It was something else entirely, a sound of anguish, of yearning, of something that Jake's rational mind refused to accept but his gut recognized instantly. The German Shepherd took one step forward, straining against his training, against every ingrained instinct to remain still until commanded otherwise. His ears were pressed back against his head, and that strange, deliberate tail wag had stopped. He was trembling. Rex, stay, Jake commanded, his voice automatic but uncertain. Rex stayed, but his eyes never left Emma. The dog's chest was heaving as if he'd just finished a hard run, and a low, keening sound emerged from his throat. I think we should take a break, Principal Whitmore announced to the crowd, her voice projecting over Emma's sobs and the rising chatter. Teachers, please escort your students back to their classrooms. We'll resume our normal schedule. The gymnasium erupted into controlled chaos as teachers herded confused and chattering children toward the exits. Jake heard fragments of conversations. Why was that little girl crying? She said that dog was her daddy. Dogs can't be daddies, stupid. Maybe it's her daddy's dog. Mrs. Patterson was backing away, still holding the inconsolable Emma, when Jake heard himself call out, "Wait." The teacher paused, turning back with Emma still in her arms. The little girl's sobs had reduced to hiccuping gasps, her face buried in Mrs. Patterson's shoulder, but one small hand remained extended toward Rex. What's her name? Jake asked. Emma Chen, Mrs. Patterson replied. She's 3 years old. She's normally in our preschool program, but we brought her today thinking, well, we hoped that something exciting might help her. She looked down at the child with profound sadness. This is the first time she's spoken since her father died. Jake felt his throat tighten. Her father's name. David Chen. He was killed in a car accident on I-71 last September, head-on collision with a drunk driver. Mrs. Patterson adjusted her grip on Emma, who had gone limp with exhaustion from crying. Emma was very close to him. The trauma specialist said she's stuck in a form of selective mutism brought on by grief. The gymnasium had nearly emptied now. Just a few lingering teachers and parent volunteers collecting forgotten jackets and water bottles. Principal Whitmore stood nearby, clearly uncertain how to proceed with this unprecedented situation. Jake looked down at Rex. His K-9 partner sat at attention now, back in professional mode, but something in the dog's eyes had changed. There was a depth there, a quality of awareness that Jake had never noticed before, or perhaps had never wanted to see. "Can I ask you something that might sound strange?" Jake said to Mrs. Patterson. She nodded, patting Emma's back in a soothing rhythm. "Did David Chen have any distinguishing marks? Tattoos, birthmarks, scars?" Mrs. Patterson's eyebrows rose. "I wouldn't know personally, but why are you asking?" "I'm not sure," Jake admitted, and it was the truth. Something was pulling at the edges of his consciousness, a connection he couldn't quite make, a pattern he couldn't quite see. "Is Emma's mother available?" "Linda Chen works at Riverside Hospital. She's a nurse in the ICU. I have her contact information in the office." Principal Whitmore stepped forward. "Officer Morrison, I'm not sure what you're thinking, but perhaps this isn't the right time." "Please," Jake interrupted, surprised by the urgency in his own voice. "I know this sounds unusual, but I'd like to speak with Mrs. Chen, today, if possible." In his arms, Emma had grown quiet, but she turned her head to look at Rex once more. Her eyes were red and swollen, her cheeks blotchy with tears, but her expression had shifted from grief to something else. "Hoping." She whispered something so softly that Jake almost missed it, but in the echoing quiet of the nearly empty gymnasium, the words carried. "Daddy knows, Daddy remembers me." Rex's ears perked forward, and the dog's tail gave one solid, deliberate thump against the polished floor. Jake Morrison had been a police officer for 12 years and a K-9 handler for 3. He believed in evidence, in facts, in logical explanations. But standing in that gymnasium, watching his trained German shepherd respond to a grieving 3-year-old's desperate belief, Jake felt the ground beneath his feet shift in a way that had nothing to do with the physical world. Something was wrong here, or impossible, or both. And he was going to find out what. An hour later, Jake Morrison sat in Principal Whitmore's office, Rex lying at his feet with unusual stillness. The dog hadn't touched the water bowl Jake had placed beside him, hadn't responded with his typical enthusiasm to the treats offered by the school secretary. Rex simply lay there, his massive head resting on his paws, his eyes distant and unfocused in a way that made Jake increasingly uneasy. Through the office window, Jake could see the normal rhythm of the school day resuming. Children walking in neat lines to the library, teachers carrying stacks of papers, the art instructor pushing a cart laden with supplies. Everything had returned to normal for everyone except Jake Morrison, who couldn't shake the image of Emma Chen's tear-stained face or the certainty in her voice when she'd said those two impossible words. The office door opened, and a woman entered with the hurried energy of someone pulled away from important work. She was petite, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, wearing navy blue scrubs printed with tiny stethoscopes. Her face showed the kind of exhaustion that went deeper than missing a night's sleep, the bone-deep weariness of someone who'd been carrying an unbearable weight for far too long. "Mrs. Chen," Jake stood, extending his hand. "I'm Officer Jake Morrison. Thank you for coming on such short notice." Linda Chen shook his hand briefly, her eyes scanning the room with barely concealed anxiety. "The school said it was urgent. Is Emma okay? They said something happened during the police dog demonstration, but no one would tell me." Her gaze dropped to Rex, and her voice faltered. "Is that the dog?" "Yes, ma'am, this is Rex, and Emma is fine physically, but something happened today that I think you should know about." Jake gestured to the chair across from Principal Whitmore's desk. "Please, sit down." Linda perched on the edge of the chair, her nurse's training evident in the way she assessed Jake's face, reading his expression like vital signs. "Just tell me straight. I've had enough careful explanations from therapists and grief counselors to last a lifetime." Jake appreciated her directness. Emma spoke today, for the first time in 6 months, according to her teacher. Linda's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes suddenly bright with tears. "She spoke. What did she say?" "She looked at Rex and said, 'My daddy.'" Jake watched Linda's face carefully. "And then she became very distressed, crying for her father. Mrs. Patterson told me that David passed away last September. The light that had briefly sparked in Linda's eyes dimmed. Her shoulders sagged. Oh, I see. She fumbled in her purse for a tissue. The therapist warned us this might happen. Emma seeing her father in random things, a man at the grocery store, a stranger's voice, apparently now a police dog. She wiped at her eyes. She used to follow her daddy everywhere. They had this special bond. David worked from home as a software engineer, so he was with her constantly. When he died, it was like half of her world just vanished. I understand, and I'm sorry for your loss, Jake said carefully. But I need to ask you some questions that might seem strange. Can you tell me exactly what happened to your husband? Linda's fingers twisted the tissue into a tight rope. September 15th, a Saturday, David was driving back from a client meeting in Cleveland. Some drunk kid crossed the median on I-71, hit him head-on going 70 miles an hour. Her voice had gone flat, reciting facts she'd probably repeated dozens of times to insurance companies, lawyers, family members. David was killed instantly. That's what they told me. He didn't suffer. Were you able to identify the body? Linda's head snapped up, her eyes narrowing. What kind of question is that? Please, Mrs. Chen, I know it's difficult. The casket was closed, Linda said stiffly. The funeral director said the injuries were too extensive. I saw him at the hospital, but she closed her eyes. His face was covered. They let me hold his hand. I saw his wedding ring, a scar on his left wrist from a skateboarding accident when he was 14. I knew it was him. Jake leaned forward. Did David have any other distinguishing marks, tattoos, birthmarks? Why are you asking me this? Linda's voice rose. My daughter had a breakdown at school, and you're interrogating me about my dead husband's body. Because Rex is not just any dog, Jake said quietly, and I need to understand something that doesn't make sense. Linda stared at him for a long moment, then let out a shaky breath. David had a birthmark on his right shoulder blade, shaped like a crescent moon. His mother used to tell him he was marked by luck. Her laugh was bitter. Some luck. Jake felt something cold settle in his stomach. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through his photos until he found what he was looking for, a picture from Rex's last veterinary exam, taken just 2 weeks ago. The vet had noted an unusual pigmentation on the dog's skin and photographed it for the records. He turned the phone toward Linda. The image showed Rex's right shoulder blade, where the fur parted to reveal a distinct crescent-shaped marking on the skin beneath. Linda's face went white. That can't be. Where did Rex come from? Linda whispered, her eyes locked on the phone screen. Where did you get this dog? I don't know, Jake admitted, and the words tasted like ash in his mouth. Rex was assigned to me 3 years ago, but I never questioned his background. He came from a private security company that donated him to the department. I was just grateful to have such a well-trained partner. 3 years ago, Linda repeated. David died 6 months ago. I know, the timeline doesn't make sense, but I'm going to find out where Rex really came from. Jake pocketed his phone. Mrs. Chen, I need to ask you something, and I need you to really think about your answer. In the days before David's accident, did he mention anything unusual? Any strange meetings, phone calls, medical appointments? Linda frowned, thinking. He had a headache, a bad one for about 3 days before the accident. He went to see a neurologist. David never went to doctors unless I made him, so it must have been bad. The neurologist ordered an MRI, scheduled for the Monday after. She stopped. After the accident. Do you remember which neurologist? Dr. Patel at Columbus Neurology Associates. But I called to cancel the appointment after David died, and they said they had no record of it. I assumed David had written down the wrong practice or I'd misunderstood him. I was pretty out of it those first few weeks. Jake made a note in his phone. What about his job? Did he mention any new clients, any unusual projects? He just started working with a new company, a biotech firm, I think. He was doing some kind of data security consultation for them. He was excited about it, said it paid well. Linda's brow furrowed. Genesis something, Genesis Labs. The name hit Jake like a physical blow. He kept his expression neutral, but his pulse was racing. Are you sure? Pretty sure. Why? Does that mean something to you? Before Jake could answer, Rex lifted his head and made a sound. Not a bark, not a whimper, but something eerily close to a human groan of distress. The dog stood, walked to Linda, and did something he'd never done in all his time as a K-9 officer. Rex placed his head in her lap and looked up at her with unmistakable, heartbreaking recognition. Linda gasped, her hands hovering over the dog's head, trembling. David used to do that, she whispered. When I came home from a bad shift at the hospital, he'd put his head in my lap just like this and look at me exactly that way. Jake watched as Linda's fingers finally made contact with Rex's fur, stroking the dog's head with a gentleness born of muscle memory. Rex closed his eyes, and his tail moved in a slow, deliberate rhythm, the same rhythm Jake had seen in the gymnasium. Officer Morrison, Linda said, her voice breaking, what's happening? Please tell me what's happening. Jake Morrison looked at the woman and the dog before him, at the impossible connection that defied everything he knew about the world, and realized he was about to step across a line from which there would be no return. I don't know, he said honestly, but I'm going to find out. Mrs. Chen, do you still have David's laptop, his phone, any files from his work with Genesis Labs? Linda nodded slowly, unable to take her eyes off Rex. Everything's in boxes in our garage. I couldn't bring myself to go through it. I need to see those files, Jake said, and I need you to trust me, even though what I'm about to suggest sounds insane. Linda finally looked up at him, tears streaming freely down her face. Officer, 6 months ago my husband died and my daughter stopped speaking. Today, she spoke for the first time, calling your dog her daddy. Insane is relative at this point. Jake pulled out his business card and handed it to her. I'll come by tonight after my shift. Don't mention this to anyone else. And Mrs. Chen, he paused, choosing his words carefully, if I'm right about what I suspect, there are people who would very much like to keep it quiet, people who might be dangerous. Linda clutched the card, her other hand still resting on Rex's head. You think my husband's death wasn't an accident? It wasn't a question. Jake met her eyes and saw the same thing he felt in his own gut, the terrible certainty that they were standing at the edge of a truth that would change everything. I think, Jake said slowly, that we need to find out exactly what Genesis Labs was working on, and why a police dog has your husband's birthmark. Chen family lived in a modest 2-story house in the suburb of Worthington, with a maple tree in the front yard and a basketball hoop over the garage door. Jake Morrison arrived at 7:30 that evening, just as the sun was painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. He'd left Rex at the station kennels, deciding it was too soon to bring the dog back into Emma's life, until he understood what was really happening. Linda met him at the door, looking even more exhausted than she had that afternoon. Emma's asleep, she said quietly, leading him through a living room scattered with children's toys and unfolded laundry. She crashed hard after school, all that emotion, I guess. Has she said anything else? Not a word. Linda's voice was hollow. Back to silence, but she drew a picture before bed. She picked up a piece of construction paper from the coffee table and handed it to Jake. The drawing was simple, done in crayon with the uncertain hand of a preschooler. But the image was clear. A little girl holding hands with a large dog. Above them, in the sky, floated a stick figure with a halo. She drew herself with the dog, Linda said, and that's David watching over them. At least that's what I think it means. She set the drawing down carefully as if it were made of glass. The garage is this way. The garage was a repository of grief, packed with cardboard boxes labeled in neat handwriting. David's clothes, David's books, David's office equipment. Linda gestured to a stack in the corner marked Work Files and Electronics. I kept meaning to go through it all, donate what we didn't need, but I just couldn't face it. She wrapped her arms around herself. Every time I came out here, I'd just stand and stare at the boxes and then go back inside. Jake pulled out his flashlight and knelt beside the electronics box. Inside, he found David's laptop, still in its protective sleeve, along with an external hard drive, a tablet, and a phone that had long since died. Do you know his passwords? He used the same one for everything, Emma's birthday plus the word peanut. Linda smiled sadly. Security expert who used the same password everywhere. I used to tease him about it. Jake powered up the laptop, grateful when it still held a charge. The password worked, and he was greeted by David Chen's desktop, a photo of Linda and Emma at the beach, both laughing into the camera. The image felt like an intrusion, a glimpse into a life that had been brutally cut short. What exactly are we looking for? Linda asked, pulling up a folding chair beside him. Anything related to Genesis Labs. Emails, contracts, project files. Jake opened the email application and began scrolling through David's inbox. Most of it was mundane client communications, spam, family messages. Then he found a folder labeled GL Project. Inside were a series of emails from an address he didn't recognize, email protected. The first email was dated August 10th, 5 weeks before David's death. Mr. Chen, we were impressed by your credentials and would like to discuss a consulting opportunity. The project involves sensitive data architecture for cutting-edge neurological research. Compensation would be substantial. Are you available for a preliminary meeting? Dr. Marcus Webb. Jake clicked through the subsequent emails, watching the conversation develop. David had met with Dr. Webb twice, signed a non-disclosure agreement, and begun work on what the emails vaguely described as a neural mapping database system. Does this make sense to you? Jake asked Linda. Neural mapping. She leaned closer to the screen. David wasn't a neuroscientist, but he was brilliant with data architecture. If someone needed to store and process massive amounts of complex information, he could build the systems to do it. She pointed to an email dated September 3rd. Look at this one. David, we need to accelerate the timeline. The board is pressuring us to show results. Can you come in this Saturday for extended testing? We'll compensate you for weekend hours. MW. September 3rd was a Saturday, Linda said. David told me he had to work, but he'd be home by dinner. He came back around 7 and he looked terrible, pale, sweating. That's when the headache started. Jake felt his pulse quicken. Did he tell you what happened? He said he'd been working in a lab with poor ventilation, that he felt lightheaded. I wanted him to go to the emergency room, but he insisted he was fine. The headaches got worse over the next few days, and finally I made him call that neurologist. Linda's hands were shaking. What did they do to him at Genesis Labs, Officer Morrison? I don't know yet. Jake scrolled through more emails, but they stopped abruptly on September 10th. After that date, there was nothing from Dr. Webb or anyone else at Genesis Labs. It was as if the project had simply ceased to exist. He opened the Work Files folder and found dozens of documents, technical specifications, database schemas, system architecture diagrams. Most of it was beyond Jake's understanding, but one file caught his attention. Project Continuity Notes, DocX. Jake opened it and began to read. The document was dated September 9th, written in David's voice, clearly intended as project notes to himself. Initial tests today were concerning. Dr. Webb insists the neural mapping resolution is insufficient for the consciousness transfer protocol. They want to increase the scanning intensity, but I've reviewed the safety data, and I'm not comfortable with the exposure levels they're proposing. The electromagnetic fields they're using are well beyond FDA guidelines for human subjects. I asked about their institutional review board approval, and Webb got defensive. Said this was preliminary research, that didn't require IRB oversight. That's not how it works. If they're scanning human brains at these intensities, they need approval. They want me to come back Saturday for a full baseline scan of my own neural patterns. Webb says they need data from a healthy adult male for comparison purposes. I'm going to do it. The money is too good to walk away, but I'm going to document everything. If they're cutting corners on safety, someone needs to know. The notes ended there. Jake sat back, his mind racing. He volunteered to be scanned. They scanned his brain 6 days before he died. Linda had gone very still beside him. Consciousness transfer protocol, she read aloud. What does that mean? Exactly what it sounds like, I think. Jake's voice was grim. Genesis Labs was trying to transfer human consciousness, memories, personality, everything that makes a person who they are, into another vessel. That's science fiction. That's not possible. 6 months ago, I would have agreed with you. Jake turned to look at Linda. But today, I watched your daughter recognize something in my K-9 partner that shouldn't be there. I watched a trained police dog respond to her in a way that had nothing to do with his training. He gestured to the laptop screen. Your husband was scanned by Genesis Labs. He died 5 days later in a car accident. And somehow, a dog with his birthmark ended up in the Columbus Police Department K-9 unit. Linda stood abruptly, packing to the garage door and back. You're saying they put David into a dog, that they turned my husband into an animal. I'm saying we need more information. Jake pulled out his phone and opened a search browser. He typed Genesis Labs Columbus and hit enter. The first result was a brief news article from the Columbus Dispatch, dated March 15th, 2 years prior. Local biotech firm shutters amid ethics violations. Genesis Laboratories, a neuroscience research facility in the Brewery District, has permanently closed following an investigation by the NIH Office of Research Integrity. The investigation, triggered by whistleblower complaints, found that the company conducted unauthorized human experiments without proper oversight or informed consent. No criminal charges have been filed, but the company's founders face permanent bans from federally funded research. Assets are being liquidated. The article was short, buried in the business section, the kind of story that wouldn't make headlines but would end careers. Jake kept reading, clicking through to related articles, piecing together the timeline. Genesis Labs had closed in March, 6 months after David's death. Their equipment and research animals had been sold at auction. One buyer had been SecureTech Solutions, a private security firm that provided K-9 units to law enforcement agencies. SecureTech Solutions had gone bankrupt 8 months later, and their assets, including several trained dogs, had been donated to police departments across Ohio. Rex had arrived at the Columbus Police Department 2 years ago this coming June. They did it, Jake said, the words coming out in a whisper. They actually did it. They transferred your husband's consciousness into a dog, probably as a test, probably without his knowledge or consent. And when he died in that car accident. It wasn't an accident, Linda finished, her voice sharp. They killed him. They scanned his brain, put him into an animal, and then they killed him to cover it up. Jake wanted to tell her she was jumping to conclusions, that they needed more evidence, but every instinct he had was screaming that she was right. We need proof. We need someone from Genesis Labs to talk. The article mentioned a whistleblower. Jake nodded, already typing. Finding whistleblowers in closed investigations wasn't easy, but it wasn't impossible either. He had contacts in the police department, friends in the FBI, and a growing determination to uncover the truth. Give me 24 hours, he told Linda. I'm going to find someone who worked at Genesis Labs, someone who knows what they did to your husband. Linda looked at him with eyes that held both hope and terror. And then what? If you're right, if David is somehow inside your police dog, what do we do? It was the question Jake had been avoiding since the moment Emma had spoken those two impossible words. I don't know, he admitted, But we're going to figure it out. Together. Jake Morrison didn't sleep that night. After leaving Linda's house, he'd driven back to the police station and signed himself into the records room, claiming he needed to review case files. What he actually did was pull every scrap of documentation related to Rex's acquisition by the K-9 unit. The file was surprisingly thin. Rex had been transferred to the Columbus PD on June 12, 21 months ago, from SecureTech Solutions as part of a donation package that included 2 other dogs. The paperwork listed Rex as a 4-year-old German Shepherd, fully trained in narcotics detection and suspect apprehension. There was a basic veterinary health certificate, a record of vaccinations, and a transfer of ownership form. What there wasn't was a breeding history. No puppy registration, no lineage documentation, no early training records. For a dog supposedly 4 years old at the time of transfer, Rex's documented life began exactly 6 weeks before he arrived at the police department. 6 weeks after David Chen's death. Jake spread the papers across the desk, his coffee growing cold beside him. He pulled up the SecureTech Solutions bankruptcy filing on his laptop and began cross-referencing dates. The security company had acquired assets from Genesis Labs at a liquidation auction on April 3rd. The auction manifest listed laboratory equipment, office furniture, and research animals. Research animals. Rex wasn't donated to the police as a trained security dog. He was sold as a research animal from a biotech lab that had been shut down for ethics violations. Jake's hands were shaking as he picked up his phone. It was past midnight, but he called anyway. Detective Sarah Chen, no relation to David, worked in the fraud division and owed him a favor from a case the previous year. "This better be important, Morrison," she answered, her voice thick with sleep. "I need you to run a full background check on a company called Genesis Laboratories. Specifically, I need the names of everyone who worked there, scientists, technicians, janitorial staff, everyone." "At midnight, what's this about?" "I can't explain yet, but Sarah, this is important, maybe the most important thing I've ever asked you for." There was a long pause. "You're serious?" "Completely. Give me until morning. I'll send you what I find." Jake thanked her and ended the call. He sat in the fluorescent-lit records room, surrounded by filing cabinets full of solved and unsolved cases, and felt the weight of what he was uncovering settle over him like a shroud. If he was right, if David Chen's consciousness really had been transferred into Rex, then this wasn't just about one man and one dog. This was about a technology that could fundamentally alter what it meant to be human, a technology that people had already killed to protect. And Jake Morrison, a K-9 officer with a high school diploma and 3 years of police training, was the only person standing between that secret and the world. By 8 o'clock the next morning, Jake had a list of 43 names, former Genesis Labs employees, compiled by Detective Chen from tax records, employment databases, and LinkedIn profiles. Most had scattered after the company's closure, taking jobs at other research facilities, universities, or leaving the field entirely. Jake started making calls. The first 12 people either didn't answer or hung up the moment he mentioned Genesis Labs. The 13th, a former lab technician named Robert Cross, listened to Jake's introduction and then said, very quietly, "I can't talk about this. I signed an NDA, please don't call again." "Even if it involves a possible homicide," Jake pressed. The line went dead. Jake kept calling. A former accountant said she'd only handled payroll and knew nothing about the research. A janitor said he'd never been allowed past the front offices. An IT specialist said the servers had been wiped clean before the company closed, and he couldn't help even if he wanted to. It was approaching noon when Jake reached Dr. Sarah Reeves. She answered on the third ring, her voice professional and cautious. "This is Dr. Reeves." "Dr. Reeves, my name is Officer Jake Morrison with the Columbus Police Department. I'm calling about your former employer, Genesis Laboratories. He expected her to hang up like the others. Instead, there was a sharp intake of breath and then, "Is this about the dogs?" Jake's heart nearly stopped. What dogs? The research dogs, the ones that were supposed to be euthanized but weren't. Dr. Reeves spoke quickly, as if the words had been dammed up for years and were now flooding out. I've been waiting for someone to call about this. I tried to report it to the FDA, to the NIH, to anyone who would listen, but everyone said the case was closed. Where are you calling from? The Columbus Police Department. Dr. Reeves, I need to meet with you in person, today if possible. Are you alone? Is this an official investigation? Jake hesitated. Not yet. Right now it's just me asking questions. There was a long silence. Then, I work at Riverside Veterinary Clinic on Morse Road. I have a break at 2 o'clock. There's a coffee shop next door. Come alone, Officer Morrison. If I see anyone else, I walk. The coffee shop was nearly empty when Jake arrived at 1:50. He ordered a black coffee and took a table in the back corner, his eyes on the door. At exactly 2 o'clock, a woman in blue scrubs entered, mid-40s, with graying hair pulled into a bun and the kind of direct, analytical gaze that marked her as a scientist. Dr. Sarah Reeves bought herself a tea and sat across from him without preamble. "Show me your badge." Jake complied. She studied it carefully, then nodded and pulled out her phone, placing it face down on the table between them. "I'm recording this conversation. If something happens to me, it uploads to the cloud automatically." "That's fine," Jake said. "Dr. Reeves, what can you tell me about Genesis Labs research?" "What do you already know?" "I know they were working on consciousness transfer technology. I know they conducted unauthorized experiments. And I know they had research animals that were supposed to be destroyed but weren't." Dr. Reeves wrapped her hands around her teacup. "I was a neuroscientist specializing in memory formation. Genesis Labs recruited me 5 years ago with promises of groundbreaking work in treating Alzheimer's and dementia. What they were actually doing was trying to map and transfer human consciousness." "Is that even possible?" "We didn't think so. Not at first. But Dr. Marcus Webb, the founder, he was brilliant. Unethical, but brilliant. He developed a scanning technology that could map neural patterns at a resolution nobody had ever achieved before. And then he developed a method to implant those patterns into a new brain structure." Jake leaned forward. "A dog's brain." Dr. Reeves nodded slowly. "Among others. We tested on rats first, then primates, then dogs. The theory was that if we could successfully transfer consciousness to a different brain structure, we could eventually transfer it to cloned bodies, artificial substrates, anything. Immortality through consciousness preservation." "Did it work?" "That's the terrifying thing, Officer Morrison. It did. Not perfectly, there were gaps, degradation, translation errors between human and animal neurology, but we successfully transferred consciousness from one organism to another." Her hands were trembling now. "And then the board wanted human trials, real human consciousness transferred into animal hosts. Without consent." Dr. Webb argued that informed consent was impossible because the subjects wouldn't believe it was real. He said we needed to prove the technology worked first, then seek approval. Dr. Reeves looked away. "I refused to participate. That's when I became a problem." Jake pulled out his phone and showed her David Chen's photo. "Do you recognize this man?" Dr. Reeves stared at the image and all color drained from her face. "David Chen, the consultant. Oh God. What happened to him?" Webb needed a baseline scan, a complete neural map of a healthy adult human. He hired Chen under false pretenses, told him it was for database architecture work. Chen came in for what he thought was a routine brain scan as part of the project. Dr. Reeves set down her tea with shaking hands. "I wasn't there that day, but I heard the rumors. The scan was supposed to be non-invasive, but Webb increased the intensity. He wanted a complete consciousness map, not just a structural scan. And then Chen died in a car accident. 5 days later, and everyone at Genesis Labs was told never to speak about it. We were shut down less than 2 weeks after Chen's death. The official story was whistleblower complaints about animal welfare, but I think someone realized what Webb had done and pulled the plug before it became public. Jake felt cold despite the warm coffee shop. Dr. Reeves, what happened to the research animals, the ones that were supposed to be euthanized? Webb had a partner at SecureTech Solutions, someone who could place the animals where they'd never be questioned: police departments, security firms, private homes. Nobody looks twice at a trained German shepherd working for law enforcement. She met his eyes. "You have one of the dogs, don't you?" "A German shepherd named Rex. He has a crescent-shaped birthmark on his right shoulder blade." Dr. Reeves closed her eyes. "David Chen had that birthmark. I saw it during one of his scans. It was in his medical imaging file." There it was, confirmation, the impossible made real. "Can you prove it?" Jake asked. "Can you examine Rex and confirm whether he's carrying a human consciousness?" "If I still had access to the scanning equipment, maybe. But that's all been destroyed or sold. What I can do is a behavioral analysis. The dogs that successfully received consciousness transfers showed specific cognitive markers: human-level problem-solving, emotional responses beyond canine norms, attempts at communication that transcended normal training." She paused. "And they responded to stimuli from their previous lives in ways that no amount of training could explain." Jake thought of Rex's reaction to Emma, to Linda, to the photograph of David's family. "I need you to examine my K9 partner, unofficially, today if possible." Dr. Reeves pulled a business card from her pocket. "Bring him to the clinic at 7 tonight, after hours. I'll make sure we're alone." As Jake reached for the card, Dr. Reeves grabbed his wrist. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "Officer Morrison, if I'm right about what's happened, there are people who will kill to keep this quiet. David Chen's death might not have been an accident. Be very, very careful who you trust." At 7 o'clock that evening, Jake pulled into the parking lot of Riverside Veterinary Clinic with Rex in the back seat. The German shepherd had been unusually quiet during the drive, as if sensing the gravity of what was about to happen. Through the clinic's glass doors, Jake could see Dr. Reeves waiting, the interior lights dimmed, the reception area empty. She met him at the entrance, locking the door behind him. "This way." The examination room was small and clinical, smelling of antiseptic and animal fear. Dr. Reeves gestured for Jake to bring Rex to the stainless steel table, but the dog hesitated, his eyes fixed on the veterinarian with something that looked remarkably like human apprehension. "It's okay, boy," Jake murmured, though he wasn't sure if he was comforting his K9 partner or whatever consciousness might be trapped inside. For the next 90 minutes, Dr. Reeves put Rex through a battery of tests. She started with basic commands, documenting how he responded. Then she moved to more complex tasks: puzzle boxes designed for primate cognition studies, pattern recognition exercises, memory tests that went far beyond standard K9 training. Rex solved every puzzle, not with the trial-and-error approach of an animal learning through conditioning, but with the kind of logical deduction that suggested human reasoning. Dr. Reeves then pulled out a laptop and began showing Rex a series of images, random photographs of places, objects, people. Rex showed mild interest in most, the typical curiosity of a dog seeing pictures. Then she displayed a photo of a software development conference from 3 years ago. Rex's ears shot forward. He whined and pressed his nose against the screen, his tail wagging frantically. "What is it?" Jake asked. Dr. Reeves zoomed in on the crowd. There in the third row, wearing a conference badge and a slight smile, was David Chen. "He recognizes himself," Dr. Reeves whispered, "or he recognizes who he used to be." She pulled up more images, photos she'd found on David Chen's LinkedIn profile, his company website, public records. Each time David appeared in a photograph, Rex reacted with unmistakable recognition and distress. When Dr. Reeves showed him pictures of Linda and Emma, the dog became so agitated that Jake had to hold him still. Finally, Dr. Reeves stepped back, removing her latex gloves with slow, deliberate movements. Officer Morrison, in my professional opinion as a neuroscientist with 15 years of experience, this animal is demonstrating cognitive patterns consistent with human consciousness. The level of recognition, the emotional responses, the problem-solving abilities, these aren't the results of training. This is a human mind adapting to a canine neural substrate. Jake had expected the confirmation, but hearing it spoken aloud still felt like a punch to the gut. What do I do? That's not a scientific question. That's a moral one. Dr. Reeves crossed her arms. If David Chen's consciousness is truly within this animal, then you're dealing with a person who's been trapped in a form he never consented to, unable to communicate, unable to be with his family. That's a violation so profound I don't even know what to call it. Can it be reversed? Not with any technology I'm aware of. The original body is gone. Even if we could scan Rex's neural patterns, where would we put them? She paused. But Officer Morrison, there's something else you need to consider. If this dog is David Chen, he deserves to know his family. And they deserve to know he's still here in whatever form that might take. 2 hours later, Jake stood on the Chen family's front porch with Rex at his side, his hand poised to knock. He'd called ahead, telling Linda only that he had information she needed to see in person. He hadn't told her he was bringing the dog. Linda opened the door, her eyes widening when she saw Rex. Officer Morrison, what? Please, Jake said quietly. Just let us come in, trust me. Something in his expression must have convinced her. She stepped aside, allowing them into the foyer. From upstairs, Jake could hear the sounds of a children's television program. Emma was still awake. Rex stood perfectly still in the entryway, his nose working, scenting the house. Then, without any command from Jake, the dog walked purposefully into the living room as if he'd been there 1,000 times before. He went directly to a worn leather armchair positioned near the window, David's chair, Jake realized, seeing the Afghan draped over one arm, the book still resting on the side table. Rex circled the chair once, twice, 3 times, then lay down beside it with a deep, almost human sigh. Linda's hand flew to her mouth. That's exactly what David did, every single night when he got home from work, 3 circles, then he'd sit down. Mrs. Chen, Jake said gently, I had Rex examined by Dr. Sarah Reeves, a former Genesis Labs neuroscientist. She confirmed what we suspected. The consciousness patterns, the memories, the personality, they're human. They're David's. Linda sank onto the couch, her eyes never leaving Rex. How is this possible? How is any of this possible? Before Jake could answer, small footsteps sounded on the stairs. Emma appeared in her pajamas, clutching a stuffed rabbit. Her eyes went immediately to Rex, and her face lit up with a joy Jake hadn't seen in any of the photos of her from the past 6 months. Daddy, she cried, running toward the dog. Rex stood, his tail wagging, and met Emma halfway. The little girl threw her arms around the German shepherd's neck, burying her face in his fur. Daddy came back. I knew Daddy would come back. Linda started to rise to pull her daughter away, but Jake touched her arm. Watch, he whispered. Emma pulled back, looking into Rex's eyes with the complete trust of a child talking to her father. Daddy, remember our secret song, the one you made up just for me. Rex tilted his head and Emma began to hum. After a moment, the dog joined in, not with words obviously, but with a melodic whine that rose and fell in perfect harmony with Emma's humming. The tune was simple, just a few bars, but the synchronization was impossible to dismiss as coincidence. And Daddy, Emma continued, her voice dropping to a whisper, remember what you called me, the special name. Rex responded by gently pawing at Emma's stomach, right where a father might playfully poke a child. Emma giggled. "Peanut butter princess, you remember." Linda was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face. David always poked her belly when he said that, always right there in that exact spot. Emma stepped back, her expression suddenly serious beyond her years. "Daddy, can you do the dance, please? The silly dance you did to make me laugh." For a long moment, Rex simply stared at the little girl. Then slowly, impossibly, the German shepherd rose up on his hind legs. He maintained his balance, something dogs could do but rarely with such control, and spun in a complete circle. Then another, 2 full rotations before dropping back to all fours. Linda let out a sound halfway between a laugh and a sob. The David dance, that's what we called it. He'd spin twice, always twice, and Emma would count for him. She stood on shaking legs and approached the dog. "David, is it really you in there?" Rex looked up at her, and Jake saw something in the dog's eyes that transcended species. Recognition, love, and a grief so profound it seemed to radiate from him like heat. Linda knelt down, ignoring the tears, ignoring the impossibility, ignoring everything except the truth standing before her. She reached out and touched the crescent-shaped marking on Rex's shoulder, the birthmark she'd traced with her fingers 1,000 times on her husband's skin. "I don't understand how this happened," she said, her voice breaking. "I don't understand any of this, but I know you. I know the way you look at me. I know the way you move. I know you, David." Rex pressed his head against her chest, in the exact spot where David used to rest his head when they embraced. And Linda wrapped her arms around the dog, holding her husband in whatever form he now existed, and wept for everything they'd lost and everything that, against all logic and reason, still remained. Emma crawled into the embrace, sandwiching Rex between herself and her mother, and for a moment the Chen family was whole again, broken and impossible and wrong in every way that mattered, but together. Jake Morrison stood in the doorway, watching this reunion that shouldn't exist, and felt the full weight of the decision he was about to make. He could report this. He could turn Rex over to authorities, allow scientists to study what had been done, potentially help others. Or he could protect this family, guard this impossible secret, and let David Chen remain with the people who loved him. The choice, Jake realized, had already been made the moment he'd brought Rex through that door. Some truths were worth protecting, some miracles were worth keeping secret. And some families deserved a second chance, no matter how impossible the form it took. Jake Morrison sat in his patrol car outside the Chen residence at 3 in the morning, unable to drive away. Through the living room window, he could see Rex curled up on the couch with Emma draped across him, both of them finally asleep after hours of reunion. Linda sat in David's old armchair, keeping vigil, her hand occasionally reaching out to touch the dog as if confirming he was real. Jake's phone lay on the passenger seat, dark and silent. One call, that's all it would take. One call to his captain, to the FBI, to any authority who could handle something this unprecedented. He'd be doing his duty as a police officer. He'd be ensuring that the technology that created this situation would be properly investigated, that those responsible would be held accountable. And he'd be destroying the only chance this family had at healing. His phone buzzed, making him jump. A text from Dr. Reeves, "Have you made a decision?" Jake stared at the message. He'd asked her to stay available tonight, sensing he might need counsel. His fingers hovered over the keyboard before he finally typed, "Can we meet now?" The response came immediately. "Waffle House on High Street, 20 minutes. Dr. Reeves was already in a corner booth when Jake arrived, a coffee and a waffle growing cold in front of her. She looked as exhausted as he felt. "You can't decide," she said as he slid into the seat across from her. "It wasn't a question. If I report this, Rex becomes government property. They'll take him to some facility, run tests, probably dissect his brain to figure out how Webb did it. David Chen will spend whatever's left of his existence in a lab, and Emma and Linda will lose him all over again. Jake rubbed his eyes. But if I don't report it, I'm covering up a crime, maybe multiple crimes, and I'm letting technology this dangerous stay hidden. Those are the facts, Dr. Reeves agreed. But you're not here for facts. You're here because you need someone to tell you that choosing the family doesn't make you a bad cop. Jake looked at her sharply. Does it? You want my honest opinion. As a scientist, I think this discovery could revolutionize our understanding of consciousness, memory, identity. It could lead to treatments for dementia, trauma, brain injuries. Keeping it secret might deny the world that benefit. She paused, stirring her coffee slowly. But as a human being who watched Genesis Labs sacrifice ethics for ambition, who saw what happens when science moves faster than morality, I think some secrets are worth keeping until the world is ready for them. And you think the world isn't ready? Officer Morrison, we can barely handle debates about AI and cloning. Do you really think society is prepared to grapple with consciousness transfer? With the question of whether a human mind in an animal body has the same rights as a human in a human body? She shook her head. This technology will come out eventually. Someone else will develop it, probably within our lifetimes. But right now, in this moment, you have the power to choose whether David Chen becomes a test subject or remains a father. Jake was quiet for a long time. If I do this, if I keep this secret, I need your help. I need a way to retire Rex from the K-9 unit without raising suspicions. And I need to make sure we're not putting Linda and Emma in danger from whoever at Genesis Labs might still be watching. Dr. Reeves pulled a laptop from her bag. I've been thinking about that. Dr. Marcus Webb died 8 months ago, heart attack, according to the obituary, though I have my doubts. Most of the other key researchers scattered to the wind after Genesis closed. The company's assets were seized, and all their research was supposedly destroyed. She turned the laptop toward Jake, showing him a news article. But there was one person who profited significantly from Genesis Labs' closure. The article detailed a patent dispute involving neural mapping technology. A company called Neurodyne Solutions had acquired certain Genesis Labs patents through the bankruptcy proceedings. The CEO of Neurodyne was listed as Dr. Richard Hartwell, a name that appeared on several of the Genesis Labs papers Dr. Reeves pulled up. Hartwell was Webb's business partner. He got out before everything collapsed, taking the intellectual property with him. If anyone knows about the successful consciousness transfers, it's him. Dr. Reeves closed the laptop. Which means if anyone might come looking for proof that the technology worked, it's him too. Jake felt ice in his veins. You think he knows about Rex? I think he knows there were successful transfers before Genesis closed. I don't know if he's specifically tracking the dogs. But Officer Morrison, if David Chen suddenly retires from being a K-9 and moves in with his widow, and if anyone is paying attention, they'll notice the connection. So what do I do? Dr. Reeves leaned forward. You create a paper trail that makes the retirement look completely routine. Behavioral issues, maybe. Minor health problems that don't require extensive examination. You make Rex seem like a liability, not an asset. And you ensure the adoption goes through proper channels with enough bureaucratic fog that no one thinks to look twice. It took Jake 3 days to set everything in motion. First, he falsified a series of incident reports documenting Rex's supposed behavioral inconsistencies, failure to alert on known narcotics, hesitation during suspect apprehension training, signs of anxiety in high-stress situations. Nothing dramatic enough to warrant investigation, but enough to make retirement seem reasonable for a K-9 approaching the end of his working life. Then he approached his captain with a carefully prepared story. Rex was showing signs of early hip dysplasia and stress-related behavioral changes. The department veterinarian, a different vet, not Dr. Reeves, had recommended retirement. Rather than euthanize a perfectly healthy dog, Jake suggested offering Rex for adoption to a family who'd specifically requested him after the school demonstration. "The little girl who had the breakdown?" Captain Williams asked, reviewing Jake's paperwork. "The one who called Rex her daddy." Jake had prepared for this. Emma Chen has selective mutism from trauma. Her therapist says having a therapy dog might help, and she's already bonded with Rex. The mother's a nurse at Riverside Hospital, stable income, good home. It's a perfect placement. Captain Williams was skeptical but ultimately pragmatic. Retiring a K9 cost less than maintaining one, and the positive PR of helping a grieving child would play well in the media if handled correctly. The adoption was approved within a week. On the day Rex officially retired from the Columbus Police Department, Jake drove him to the Chen residence one last time. Linda and Emma waited on the front porch, both trying to contain their excitement. Jake walked Rex up the driveway, the official transfer paperwork in hand. "According to the city of Columbus, you're adopting a retired police dog with minor behavioral issues," he told Linda, loud enough for any potential listening neighbors. Then, quieter, "According to me, you're getting your family back." Linda took the leash with trembling hands. "How can we ever thank you?" "Keep him safe. Keep this secret." Jake knelt down to Rex's level, looking into those two intelligent eyes. "And David, if you're really in there, take care of them. That's all the thanks I need." Rex's tail wagged once, deliberately, and the dog pressed his nose against Jake's hand in what felt distinctly like a handshake. Emma crashed into both of them, wrapping her arms around Rex's neck. "Daddy's home forever now," she announced with absolute certainty. "Right, Officer Morrison?" "That's right, Emma, forever." 6 weeks later, Jake received a call from an unknown number. A professional-sounding woman asked if he'd like to discuss his recent K9 retirement. "Who is this?" Jake asked, his hand instinctively moving toward his service weapon. "A representative of Neurodyne Solutions. We're conducting research on police dog training methodologies and noticed the unusual circumstances of your German Shepherd's retirement. We'd like to offer a generous consultation fee if you'd be willing to discuss." Jake hung up. The woman called back twice more over the next month, each time with a different pretext. Jake never answered. He made sure Linda knew to avoid any strangers asking about Rex, to never take the dog to public places where he might attract attention, to keep Emma from talking about her daddy dog to anyone outside the family. The calls eventually stopped. Either Neurodyne had given up, or they'd decided Rex wasn't worth pursuing. Either way, the Chen family was safe. 3 months after Rex's retirement, Jake drove past the Chen house on his way to work. He saw Emma in the backyard, playing fetch with Rex, her laughter carrying on the morning air. Linda sat on the back porch, coffee in hand, watching them with a smile that spoke of healing, however impossible its source. Jake thought about David Chen, the man who died in a car accident, only to wake up in a form he'd never chosen, unable to speak, unable to explain, trapped in a reality that shouldn't exist. He thought about the choice he'd made to keep that secret, to prioritize one family's happiness over scientific discovery and legal justice. Some nights, Jake wondered if he'd made the right call. Some nights, the weight of what he knew pressed down on him until he couldn't sleep. But on mornings like this, watching Emma play with her father, watching a family knit itself back together against impossible odds, Jake knew that some truths were bigger than facts. Some miracles were worth protecting. And some families deserved their happy ending, no matter how strange the path that led them there. 6 months had passed since Rex officially became part of the Chen family. The late autumn sun filtered through the kitchen window where Linda stood washing breakfast dishes, watching through the glass as Emma and Rex played in the backyard. Fallen leaves created a carpet of gold and crimson, and Emma's delighted squeals punctuated the crisp November morning. The house had slowly transformed over those months. David's home office, which Linda had kept locked like a shrine, was now open again. Rex spent hours there, lying on the rug where David used to pace during video conferences. Sometimes Linda would find the dog sitting at the desk, staring at the dark computer screen with an expression that broke her heart. A man remembering who he used to be, trapped in a form that couldn't type, couldn't code, couldn't do any of the work that had once defined him. But there were moments of grace too. Emma had started speaking in full sentences again, her selective mutism dissolving under the steady presence of her father in a different form. Her therapist called it miraculous progress, attributing it to the therapeutic bond with her special dog. The therapist had no idea how right she was about the word special. Linda dried her hands and walked to the back door, stepping onto the porch. Emma had taught David a new game. She'd built an obstacle course from garden stakes and pool noodles, and the German Shepherd navigated it with a precision that went beyond training. When Emma held up different colored cards, Rex would go to the matching colored marker she'd placed around the yard. Red card, red cone. Blue card, blue bucket. "Daddy's so smart," Emma called to her mother. "Smarter than all the dogs in the whole world." Linda smiled, but it was edged with the kind of sadness that never fully went away. "Yes, sweetie, the smartest." Because David was smart. Too smart for a dog. In quiet moments when Emma was asleep and the house was still, Linda would sit with Rex and show him photo albums, tell him about her day at the hospital, ask his opinion on decisions she had to make. And Rex would respond in the only ways he could, a paw on her hand for yes, turning his head away for no, different patterns of movement that Linda had learned to interpret. They developed a rudimentary communication system. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was something. The hardest part was watching David struggle with the limitations of his new existence. He couldn't hug his daughter the way he wanted to. Couldn't tell his wife he loved her in words. Couldn't pick up Emma when she fell, or read her bedtime stories in his own voice, or do any of the thousand small things that fathers did. But he could be present, and for a family that had believed he was gone forever, presence was everything. That evening, after Emma had gone to bed, Linda sat in the living room with Rex curled beside her on the couch. It was their routine now, these quiet hours where she could talk to her husband without the brave face she wore for their daughter. "I got a call from Dr. Reeves today," Linda said softly, her hand moving rhythmically through Rex's fur. "She said Neurodyne Solutions filed for bankruptcy last week. Apparently, they couldn't replicate the consciousness transfer without Dr. Webb's complete research notes. Everything they tried failed." She paused. "That means you might be the only successful transfer that ever existed, the only one that ever will exist." Rex's ears twitched, but he didn't move from his position against her side. "I don't know if that makes this better or worse," Linda continued, her voice catching. "On one hand, nobody else will have to go through what you're going through. On the other hand, this is permanent, David. There's no revering it, no getting your body back. This is forever." For a long moment they sat in silence. Then Rex shifted, pressing his head against Linda's chest, right over her heart. It was David's gesture, the same way he'd comforted her through difficult shifts at the hospital, through her father's death, through every hard moment of their marriage. Linda wrapped her arms around him and wept, not the desperate, grief-stricken sobs of the first months after the accident, but the quieter tears of acceptance. This was her life now. Her husband existed in a form that defied nature and logic, and she would love him anyway. "I miss your voice," she whispered into his fur. "I miss hearing you laugh. I miss the way you'd sing off-key in the shower and make terrible puns and stay up too late reading science fiction." She pulled back to look into his eyes. "But I'd rather have you like this than not have you at all. Is that selfish? Am I being selfish keeping you here when being human is impossible?" Rex pulled away and walked to the bookshelf. He nosed at the bottom shelf until a specific book tumbled free, their wedding album. He pushed it across the floor to Linda with his snout, then pawed it open to a specific page. Their wedding vows. Linda had written them herself and David had done the same. She read his words aloud, her voice shaking. I promise to love you in whatever form our life together takes. Through changes neither of us can predict, through circumstances we can't control, I promise to choose you, every day, in every way I can. Fresh tears spilled down Linda's cheeks. You're telling me this counts, that this is just another form our life could take. Rex's tail wagged once, twice, 3 times. Their code for yes, absolutely, without question. Linda laughed through her tears. You always were a man of your word. Later that night, Linda lay in bed unable to sleep. Rex had taken up his position on the floor beside her. David had never been allowed on the bed, a rule she'd enforced when they first got married, and somehow that rule held even now. The absurdity of maintaining marital bed-sharing boundaries with a German shepherd almost made her laugh. She heard the soft click of Emma's door opening, then small feet padding across the hallway. Emma appeared in the doorway, backlit by the nightlight, clutching her stuffed rabbit. Mama, can Daddy sleep in my room tonight? I had a scary dream. Linda sat up. Of course, sweetie. Emma padded over to Rex, who had already risen. Come on, Daddy. You can protect me from the monsters. As they left the room, Linda heard Emma chattering quietly. It's okay that you're a dog now, Daddy. You're still the best daddy. And when I grow up and have kids, I'm going to tell them about my daddy who loved me so much that he came back from heaven in a different body just to stay with me. Linda pressed her hand to her mouth, stifling a sob. In the morning, she found them both asleep in Emma's bed. Emma curled around Rex's body, her small hand gripping his fur, her face peaceful in a way it hadn't been since before the accident. On Emma's nightstand was a crayon drawing freshly made, a family of 3, a woman, a little girl, and a dog. Above them, written in Emma's uncertain preschool letters, were the words, My family, we are Tojther. Linda took a photo with her phone, then sent it to Jake Morrison with a simple message. Thank you for giving us this. Jake's response came 5 minutes later. Some rules are meant to be broken for the right reasons. Stay safe. Stay together. As winter settled over Columbus, the Chen family found their rhythm in this new, impossible reality. Emma continued to heal, speaking more each day, her trauma slowly releasing its grip. Linda learned to find joy in the unconventional shape their family had taken. And David, trapped in a form he'd never chosen, unable to live the life he'd planned, chose every day to be the father and husband his family needed, even if the methods were different than anyone could have imagined. On quiet evenings, when Emma was asleep and the house was still, Linda would sometimes catch Rex staring at old family photos with an expression too human for any dog. She'd see the grief there, the loss, the frustration of a brilliant mind confined to a body that couldn't express its full depth. But she'd also see the love, the fierce, unwavering love of a man who'd somehow found his way back to his family against impossible odds. And in a world that often made no sense, where tragedy struck without warning and good people suffered without reason, Linda Chen held tight to this one impossible miracle. Her husband had come home. Not in the way she'd dreamed during those first desperate weeks after the accident. Not in the form she'd have chosen if given the choice. But home nonetheless. And sometimes, on the best days, that was enough. The end.